Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. A set of causal relationships is best represented by a path diagram. The goal of this lecture is to explain some of the basic concepts of path diagrams. A mathematical concept of a graph is a collection of nodes which are connected to each other by paths. The full graph is when every node is connected to every other one, as in the right-hand side diagram. And on the left-hand side, we have a partial graph, a graph which is a subset of the full graph. In a directed graph, every path has an arrow. So this is the type of graph that we will use to denote causal relationships. In this diagram, A causes B and also causes C. So A is actually a common cause of C. Both A and D cause C. And in this case, we say that C is a collider for it is multiply and jointly caused by A and D. E is, on the other hand, independent of all other things. This is the important thing about path diagrams, that the fact that E is not connected means that it is not related to others. So lack of missing paths are also as significant as those which are present. The central question is, how do we draw a path diagram given a collection of variables? How do you decide which one causes another one? So which of the paths are causal paths and which are not? Where there is no arrow and where there is one. So this can also be interpreted in ordinary language as, what is the meaning of the sentence that X causes Y or X directly causes Y? These sentences, these questions have been subject of vast philosophical debates for centuries, and no one has any clear-cut idea of the truth. There is a reason why philosophers have failed to resolve this issue. That's because they've been searching for universal and objective truths. We will take a pragmatic approach. What works for us, not something which is universally valid for all places at all times, just what works for me at this time according to my subjective knowledge. So causality is learned by us in stages. First, by personal experience. We do some things and it causes something else to happen, so we experience causality directly. Then we know and we learn that other people are also pursuing goals, and we watch them take actions in order to achieve their goals, and we learn that the actions that they take are effective at bringing about the goals that they have. And then we learn that if, for example, on a pool table, one player hits one ball which hits another, then we learn that the intermediate objects can also serve as causal agents. And there are even more sophisticated extensions, but we won't go that far. So direct experience of causality starts almost from birth. When babies suck, that produces milk, and they know that it is their action of sucking. They personally experience the sucking and they personally experience the flow of milk in response to the sucking. So they understand that this is a causal effect. When I see other people turn lights on by flipping a switch, I learned that flipping the switch causes the light to turn on. In philosophy, the question is raised that how do we learn if when event X follows, when event X is followed by Y, does X cause Y? Well, it turns out that if we observe two things happen one after the other, we have no clue about the causality. It's only when we do X in order to achieve goal Y that we learn that X causes Y. And when we watch other agents do X to achieve their goals, then we again learn that X is a cause. All our lives we watch rainfall, and rainfall ends, and then sunshine comes, and then sunshine ends, and rainfall comes. But we never think that the rainfall is the cause of sunshine, or the sunshine is the cause of rainfall, even though we watch the conjunction quite often. So the reason is that observation does not lead to causal inference. It's our free will and our choice of goals is very closely and intimately tied. I want to achieve a certain goal. I know that I am free to choose my goals and change my goals. And I also am free to choose my actions and change my actions. So when I choose an action and this action leads to achievement of a goal, I know that this is something imposed on the natural system of observation from the outside by my personal will. By my personal will, I cause something to happen, then I know that the that the lever that I pushed in order to achieve my goal is the cause of that goal. So this gives a very important role to our personal experience and to free will in causality. And this is something that philosophers have shied away from. And for this reason, they have been unable to unravel the confusions of causality. Causality is experience-based knowledge, which means that it is based on my experience, it's subjective, it's limited in time, it's limited in space. Something may be causally effective for a short period of time for me, for this particular region. When the baby sucks, it produces milk, but that's only going to be valid for until the weaning. And after the weaning is done, this causal effect will disappear. But that's all that we need. We need to be able to reliably produce some effect for um, some duration of time, and that's enough. We have very limited knowledge. The Quran teaches us that we have been given very little knowledge. So as long as we seek to have humble goals to basically locally, partially do something without knowing exactly how it works and exactly what makes it work and exactly in what circumstances this works, then we have a pragmatic approach to causality, which goes much further than the philosopher's approach, which attempts to find universal truths and fails. This account of causality is supported by child development studies. How children learn causality is directly by causing things to happen. They reach out for objects and they can grasp them and they can move them. And so they learn that they are agents in the world and they can cause things to happen. And they also learn that there are other people in the world and they are pursuing their goals, and they watch with great interest and curiosity to see how other people achieve their goals, and they seek to imitate them in order to learn to do the things that others can do. Children watch others walk and then they learn how to do it themselves. The children are very good at guessing at goals of adults and learning the actions that they take to achieve those goals. So coming back to the path diagram, given x and given y, how do we learn if there is a causal arrow which goes from x to y? Well, basically, if the variable y has some desired value, and if I can set the value of x, and if I can change the value of x in order to achieve my desired target value of y, then I know that x is a cause of y. This methodology is radically different from conventional ones because it depends on hidden variables. The internal goal that I have in mind is not an observable variable according to logical positivism and empiricism, which says that only things which can be publicly observed should be part of scientific knowledge. And this is one of the reasons, if goals are essential to causality, as I have just argued, then the positivist philosophies will never arrive at an understanding of causality. This goal-oriented causality creates reverse causality because I have a desired future outcome uh, that leads to a current action which leads to observed outcome, and the observed outcome should match my desired outcome to a certain extent if my action is successful and if the causal chain that I have guessed or hypothesized is correct. So this is supported by quantum results, which show that occasionally we observe reversal of time in causal sequences. In the rest of this lecture, we will examine one example in detail. How do we learn what is the effect of money on the economy? And basically, according to economists, money only affects prices and affects nothing else. This is called the quantity theory of money. So, uh, according to this, money doesn't matter for the real economy. A more sophisticated version of the QTM says that money has effects in the short run, but not in the long run. This is in fact a pretty absurd theory about money. Money has effects both in the short run and in the long run. As Keynes said, why is there such controversy about something which is so obvious? Is explained in my paper on the battle for the control of money, but this is not relevant for us when it comes to assessing the causal effects. So we're going to study the analysis of Paul Romer in his paper called Trouble with Economics, in which he shows that modern macroeconomists ignore stark conflicts between their theory and observations. He says that theory tells them that money doesn't matter, but the real world tells us that it does. And so basically, one section of the paper is devoted to showing how money matters. How does money, so he wants to find the causal effect. So how does he go about doing this? This is what we will study in detail, because his demonstration matches very closely the model for causality that we have discussed. That if we have a goal and we take an action which achieves this goal, then our action is the cause of that goal. Inflation rates were running very high in the USA when Volcker came to the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, and he announced that he planned to increase the interest rate in order to control inflation. So basically, he set a future goal and he described the action that he would take in order to achieve this goal. So if he is successful in achieving the goal by this action, then this demonstrates a causal link between his action and the goal. These graphs show what happened as a result of the actions of Volcker. The blue line in the top graph is called the base, monetary base, which is one of the measures of the amount of money in the economy. The red dotted line is the CPI, Consumer Price Index, which shows what happened to the prices. From the mismatch between the two, we see that the quantity theory of money doesn't hold. Basically, Volcker came into power around 1979, and so we can see that up to 1980, the inflation graph in the bottom graph is rising, and then after the Volcker era, inflation starts going down and reaches a permanently low level after the second of the two Volcker regressions, Volcker recessions. So quite contrary to the idea that we repeatedly observe y following x, so we deduce that x causes y, we are going to deduce causality from just one event. If I can control something, then I know that my actions cause the effect that I want to get. If I can make things happen, then I know the causal effects required to make that thing happen. The blue line here represents the real interest rate, which is what Volcker was targeting. And basically, he came in at 0 in this graph, and then he raised the interest rate, leading to the first Volcker recession, which is the shaded area. And in this first recession, the standard strategy to get out of recession is to lower interest rates, and Volcker also did that. Dropped the interest rate to negative levels, and that ended the recession. But then he raised the interest rates from a negative value to about 7%, a very high rate, and this led to decline in inflation, which was gradual and kept continued, but it also led to recession, as the theory, economic theory, tells us. And so there was the second Volcker recession, which was a result of this high interest rate that lasted for quite a while. But Volcker kept the interest rate, real interest rate, above 5% until the inflation declined to a very low level. And the recession also stopped, and unemployment came down to not quite pre-Volcker levels, but fairly close. So what do we learn from this episode? Well, if taking action A reliably achieves goal G, then A causes G, and we can draw the arrow between them. What does reliably mean here? This is subjectively defined. We don't have any particular criteria that you have to observe this happen 100 times or 80 times out of 100. It's basically subjective measure of our feeling that how strongly can we trust this path. We can never be sure about causality, and then there are background mechanisms which make there are background factors which make the causal mechanism work or operate more efficiently or less. We don't usually know the factors. For example, when the child is sucking milk at his mother's breast, he knows that his sucking causes the milk to flow, but he has no idea of the mechanisms which cause this to happen and how these might fail. Similarly, when we flip a switch, it turns on the light, but we have no idea of the wiring and the electrical connection and the dam which is generating the electricity, etc. So there's a huge chain of causes, but we only observe a superficial subset of them. That's why we can operate causes with very little knowledge. So we are arguing that we learn about causality from goal-oriented actions without and goals are in the minds of the agents, so they are fundamentally unobservable, and that is why the empiricist and logical positivist philosophies, which continue to dominate minds of people, that only the observables matter, are a huge obstacle to learning about causality. So to end this lecture, suppose we have a collection of variables. How can we determine if we can draw an arrow, causal path arrow from X to Y? That is X a direct cause of Y? Well, basically, if a free agent wishes to achieve an outcome of Y equals Y star, and he sets the value of X at a certain value and achieves the desired result, then we conclude that X causes Y. This is a direct relationship if the other variables don't change very much during the time interval between setting X equals X star and observing Y equals Y star. If the time interval is very short, I flip the switch, light comes on, then the other variables don't really have much time to change, so we can assume that they did not change, and then we can assume direct causality. In situations where there is a time lag between setting X equals X star and observing our goal to happen, then other variables can also be changing over this time period, and it's possible that these other variables are intermediate values. So change in X affects Z, and change in Z affects Y, and so in these cases we are not sure about whether X is a direct cause or whether there is an intermediate variable. There are various ways to test for intermediacy and to discover whether this is a direct relationship or whether there are other intermediate variables. Some of the complications involved will be discussed in the next few lectures, but this course is not really about causality. The main goal here is to show that the numbers by themselves do not tell us the story of causality. We have to look through the numbers to the agents who are taking actions and who have goals in order to understand about causality.